At this moment, I would like to open the meeting and turn it over for our Committee on Staff and Compensation, which is chaired by Regent Bill Johnstone. Regent Johnstone?
Thank you, Chair Albrecht. As you can see from the agenda, we have only consent staff items. And before I ask whether any regent would like to remove any of those staff items from the consent to an action item, I'd like to ask Deputy Commissioner McCray to give us a few comments on what's on the staff items.
Thank you, Chairman Johnstone. The staff items in many respects could be described as normal staff items, nothing anomalous. As some of us recall, through Board of Regents policy, the board delegates to the Commissioner of Higher Education the authority to review and approve employment contracts for the majority of employees in the university system, but the board still retains the authority to act on and approve the employment contracts for certain positions in the university system. Those positions include presidents, vice presidents, chancellors, vice chancellors, commissioners, staff, and head athletic coaches. And so therefore the vast majority of the staff items that are submitted to you on items A through H are simply the reappointment of contract administrative and in some cases athletic department personnel for the fiscal year 17 term. Also, so that's the vast majority. You will also note, if you look through some of the items, there are other actions that additionally are normal or routine, such as the granting of or awarding, approving of faculty tenure in specific cases. So tenure is a process that begins at the department level, the campus level. The universities then recommend to the regents the awarding of tenure. So any faculty items that you see there in the tenure column where there's a tenure notation, that's what those would be. The item I, policy 407, employee equity interest. And we'll talk about that policy in a few minutes here as one of the information items. That is what I would describe as maybe a standard policy 407 item. It's typically a situation where a faculty member who is employed by the university teaches, performs service, performs research that is of benefit to the university, also may become associated with a private company. And the private company might have some association with the research as well. So in those situations, a 407 item sets up some procedures. There's a statutory basis for some of this procedure, whereby the university and the faculty member enter into a careful agreement that delineates some parameters, including conflict of interest management plans, that allows the faculty member to, in some cases, either have ownership in or serve as an officer on that company's board. So this is a typical 407. Like I said, we'll get to that procedure under one of the information items. So those are the staff items. The emeriti items additionally are kind of our routine process whereby when faculty retire at the department level, their peers consider their service and oftentimes put together a rationale and a nomination statement whereby a recently former faculty member, it is recommended that they attain the title of Professor Emeritus. So the emeriti faculty, anyone who is interested can read through any one of them, and the nomination statements for those proposed down the road of expanding that a little bit for these positions, then subsequent contract terms are still and would still be limited to the one-year term.
So part of the motivation for this, approved the bonus for a hire, and we were told that the reason that the bonus was necessary, a substantial bonus, was to address the legitimate concerns of the hire about the risks associated with the position. And it just struck me that a more rational way to address that concern was to have a 2-year contract to give the person some greater assurance. So I'm not interested right now in getting into details about the particular provisions. I guess conceptually, though, I'd like to hear comment about whether there's support for liberalizing our ability to provide more 2-year contracts, initial contracts, for a broader range of employees that we're recruiting in the marketplace.
Chair Johnstone, I think that this is absolutely appropriate, and it gives us the tool, our campuses the tools they need to be able to attract quality candidates. And certainly, it's my understanding that this policy had not been revised for at least 10 years. So we are due, and I think that this is an appropriate way to address the restrictions, really, that we were set forth that really didn't allow our campuses to attract those kind of candidates. So I'm in favor of this.
Yes.
Chair Johnstone, I guess I would like to hear a little bit more regarding the context of this moving forward. Do we look at other systems? What are we basing this off of? And if you could expand upon that, perhaps, Deputy Commissioner.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Regent Berkey. It's not so much looking at other systems, because we just know that organizations, public or private, that have term contract employee positions, that it is up to the employer's discretion to consider the appropriate length for duration of contract terms. And there are, in some cases, multi-year contracts that are permissible. We have them in the university system. So we have certain head athletic coaches who the Board of Regents has decided can be employed for multi-year terms of up to 3 years. The board also has a policy for adjunct non-tenure track faculty, where in some cases a non-tenure track faculty can be employed for up to 5 years. So in this case, the standard, most common term would, I believe it's anecdotal, I guess, by which I say this, but I believe the standard term for a contract administrator in a public higher education system is still the fiscal year, 1-year academic contract term, most frequently used. But we have for quite some time as a board, as a system, used the 2-year term for the initial hire of president and commissioner. And the reason for that has been to give the board a little more traction or a better chance to hire the candidate the board would like to hire. Nothing says that the initial contract term must be 2 years, but it gives you that flexibility. And this would just slightly expand the number of positions that the board and the system could use that consideration for.
Regent Shi.
This is one of those policies that surprised me. I didn't realize that there was such a limitation. So when confronted with it at our last meeting, spent a little time wondering, as you obviously did, Bill, before taking action, why we were limited in that way. Because, as you've said, Deputy Commissioner, we can still offer 1-year contracts. It's not mandatory. So I'm having trouble thinking of a downside to this. I tried to think, is there some ramification that I'm missing? But I think it was just a rule that was put in place a long time ago, and maybe the reasons for that rule are both forgotten and no longer necessary, given the permissive nature of the suggested change. I support it.
Mm-hmm. I think the reasoning was perhaps maximizing flexibility on the part of the board to make decisions to terminate without contractual limitations. But as I said, it struck me in the case that we had that we were entering into a contract where the amount was paid up front rather than being earned over a 2-year period. So that was my motive for doing it. I think there are legitimate questions and concerns about contract terms, performance standards, termination rights. I don't think we need to get into that now, but that would be something that, as we negotiate particular contracts, we'd rely on legal counsel to protect us on. Yes.
Chair Johnstone, I think I'm with the rest of the regents here on, in terms of increasing our flexibility with the length of the contract. I think it only makes sense to us, and I think we've heard from our constituents that's something they're interested in. In terms of maximizing our flexibility and not trying to get too far into the weeds here around the different bonuses, the modifications in the bonuses, I'm curious, and I wish the presidents were sitting with us of the flagships to be able to respond to the question. But I'm curious what our leadership thinks about this increase, from a potential increase from $5,000 to $10,000 for the non-base performance bonus and the recruitment bonus. While I think the increase is good, I wonder if it gives us the flexibility needed to address situations that we were in front of this summer. And I know that situation was a bit of an anomaly, but I just want to make sure that our policies provide and empower our decision makers to be able to attract the right people using whatever they can in our policies.
I think it's a very good comment, Regent Lozar. And the language that's in front of you now is merely something to stimulate a discussion. I think over the next, I would propose that if we want to move forward with this, that we develop language before the November meeting and present it at that time. And certainly regents and university presidents and members of the public would have an opportunity to provide input between now and then as to the particulars. Regent Berkey, please.
Chair Johnstone, I'm glad we are having this conversation because it definitely was a point of contention at our last meeting in the summer here. And as we're moving forward, I'd like to follow up on our discussion about performance-based bonuses. And I think that was definitely a topic raised over the summer, but I haven't seen the follow-up that I'd like to see. And perhaps if we move forward at the next meeting, I'd like to see maybe some policies in which we review how we can implement that, because that's a good way, a good system that the private sector, I think, that we can emulate here at the Regents level.
I agree. Good comment. In fact, in my notes, I said that we ought to expand this, so appreciate that. Are there any other comments, questions? Do we have an understanding that we will develop with further input for a presentation at the November, a proposal on this topic? Okay. Please.
Regent Johnstone, Chair Johnstone. I was wondering if Deputy Commissioner McCray could talk a little about the potential repeal, the crossing off of this page. In particular, I know there's some things that if we do make the adjustments, then we don't need parts of this, but there's one in particular, I think it's policy 702.5D, and it talks about assignment of administrative or other duties. So I wasn't sure if that was going to be covered potentially in a new draft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regent Lozar, our attempt at this first proposal was to provide the language, the steps, and the authority that is desired in the revision to the 711.2. And the nature of your question, yes, I was on that page that we're then trying to look at. If we make 711.2 read like it should, is there any other policy that's redundant and not needed? And that was the thought of repealing the other policy. On an issue like that, our thinking was that actually the authority is already there to assign any administrator to any type of work, and that was a very dated policy that kind of specified, I think, as you said, that upon the hire of a new campus executive, that they can be assigned to work at the commissioner's office or at another campus of the system and so forth. That management flexibility and authority is already there, even without that policy language.
Are there any other questions or comments on this matter? If not, then let's move to the next item, which we've asked for an overview, an update on the operation of the university system employee joint venture policy. As Deputy Commissioner McCray noted, we had an item on our consent agenda with respect to the University of Minnesota, University of Minnesota, sorry about that, University of Montana. Freudian slip there.
Better weather in Missoula.
There's a lot of material there, I'm going to drop it.
At the university, so the presidents are prepared to speak to those interests.
Please.
Regent Johnstone, members of the board, thanks for the opportunity to speak to this issue. I would just say that it is becoming an increasingly important opportunity for us on all of our campuses as we deliberately work to have even greater impact on economic development and the workforce in the state of Montana. So the opportunity for our faculty members to participate in business ventures is one that more and more faculty members are taking us up on, and those efforts are increasingly important to both the local and the state economy, in my opinion. So at UM, the enforcement of that policy 407 is managed through a conflict of interest plan that's established for all faculty members who are engaged in such activity. It's managed through a licensing agreement between the university and the faculty members' company. And day-to-day management of that plan is really overseen by the faculty members' chair and the dean, who are aware of the conflict of interest plan and are there to enforce the requirements of the plan for all employment-related decisions and purchases. And so in general, the conflict of interest plan addresses the use of state space and the use of students. And faculty members are required to file an annual report with campus legal counsel on the conflict of interest plan, including any changes since the last report. So for example, in the area of space, if campus or state-owned space is to be used, the UM Director of IP and Tech Transfer, a fellow named Joe Fungi, develops a lease agreement charging fair market rent for use of that space in any facilities. The university performs a periodic review of the lease agreements and the use of campus space. It's pretty rare, actually, for a faculty-owned business to rent university space at our campus because we also have available Montech, which is a business incubator facility, a private 501c3, and so many of the startup companies actually move into that Montech incubator for some period of time, paying rent to that organization, and then they move on outside of Montech in some way. So it's rare that we actually have a situation of a faculty member renting campus space, but it has happened on some occasions, and so we charge them the fair market rent to do that. In terms of students, faculty members are generally prohibited from employing students in their spin-off companies if the student is currently enrolled in any of the faculty members' classes. And that one can be tricky, particularly with graduate students, because some of those graduate students will have an interest in the company, not a financial interest, but just a general interest in the company. And so managing that relationship with students and making sure that what they're doing for their academic research, for example, is distinct from their employment in the company. So that one requires a fair amount of oversight, but it is there and it's in place, that oversight. In terms of licensing, the licensing arrangements all follow, of course, board policy and the faculty collective bargaining agreement. So those licensing agreements are developed by the UM Director of IP and Tech Transfer and reviewed by the Vice President for Research and reviewed by Campus Legal Counsel. And so the IP Director monitors that licensing activity and requires annual reports. So the board policy directs that 50% of the revenue, of any revenue that's generated, is provided to the faculty member, 50% stays with the university. And so the university portion is used to cover costs to the university, patent costs, for example, and that portion is managed by the Office of Research. So that's sort of the general activity, and Kevin McCrae asked us perhaps to provide an example. So I have one example here that I'd like to talk to you about, and this is a faculty member named Dr. Brent Ruby, who is in our College of Education and Human Sciences, and he has a spin-off company called PhysioZing, so Brent is a research professor in the Department of Health and Human Performance, and he's been conducting research on human heat stress for many years now. His ordinary research funded by the Office of Naval Research and DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, as well as Air Force Special Ops. And so during the course of this government-sponsored research, Dr. Ruby developed a novel way to monitor humans performing work in hot environments, hot temperature environments. And so he properly disclosed this intellectual property by filing an invention disclosure to the Office of Tech Transfer in 2012. And so then in the next year, he sought and obtained approval from the Board of Regents through the normal process to hold an equity interest in and to serve as an officer in this new company, PhysioZing. And so he works in accordance with our conflict management plan. And so under that plan, he has the following obligations or restrictions. So he must comply, of course, with the faculty collective bargaining agreement, which requires faculty to limit their other compensated activities so as not to impair their educational effectiveness or otherwise interfere with their professional responsibility to the university. He must disclose his interest in the spinoff company on any grant proposal seeking funding for further development or improvement in the technology of that company. He must obtain written permission from his dean and the vice president for research if he seeks additional funding, grants or otherwise, to be used to support development of that company. PhysioZing, the company, may not employ UM students who are concurrently Dr. Ruby's students at the university. Ruby operates under a continuing obligation to disclose any new intellectual property developed under grant-supported work performed at UM and to abide by UM's purchasing policies. And he's required to file an annual report with the Office of Research indicating his compliance with that conflict of interest management plan. So a fair amount of oversight that goes on there. And again, I think this is an area that is very healthy for us overall, provided we manage that conflict of interest. I'll stop there and see if you have any questions, or perhaps after Dr. Cruzado speaks to that.
Okay,
Thank
thank you,
you.
President. When we administer these programs, and lots of universities are doing this, obviously, is there anything that we can learn from the experience of other universities that we should be addressing? Have issues arisen relative to this in other universities? If so, what are they, and are we on top of that?
Regent Johnstone, members of the board, I think what's important is that our folks who administer these, so Joe Fungi, who I talked about as our Director of Tech Transfer, he is a member of the National Professional Organization. I think it's called AUTM, A-U-T-M. I can't remember what that stands for exactly, but so they attend those professional meetings just like we all attend professional meetings. So you hear other people's stories, best practices, that sort of thing. So I think I'm confident that our tech transfer folks are really knowledgeable about sort of the state of the art of this kind of university systems. There certainly have been issues. I don't think we've had any major issues that I can recall, but certainly on other campuses around the country, you end up with some significant conflict of interest that isn't managed properly. But as far as I can tell, we're in pretty good control of this, and the scale on which we operate is probably modest compared to, say, a University of Utah or one of the big institutions like that, but still a very important part of what we do.
Can you quantify the significance of the revenue that we're receiving this at a university level?
Regent Johnstone, I can't really quantify it with any specific numbers. It is still, I would say, a fairly small financial contribution to the overall picture of the university. I certainly can get those numbers for you. I don't have them on the top of my head, but it's, to be honest, I would say as a university, we're not really in this for the money. Very few universities generate big money from these kinds of inventions. The more important part of this work is I think, sort of the job creation that occurs here, and the contributions to our local economy, the recognition on the part of our business public that the universities are interested in helping to drive the economy and so on. The real success stories are more along those lines. Let me give you an example of a recent success story like that some of you have heard of. One of the newer companies in Missoula is this company called Rivertop Renewables. It's a company that was started by one of our chemistry professors who had done his research to develop better synthetic methods, more environmentally friendly synthetic methods for glucaric acid, which is a commodity chemical, and it is used in de-icers and phosphate replacements, things like that. That technology came out of one of our chemistry labs. Upon retirement, Don Kiley, the professor, started Rivertop Renewables, and now it's a company whose headquarters are housed in Missoula, and they're our anchor tenant in that incubator facility, and they now employ, it's approaching 50 people, business majors, chemistry majors, biology majors, some engineers, and so, those are 50 jobs that didn't exist just a few years ago, jobs that our students may have had to leave the state to get. And we'll get some revenue from that operation as it grows and matures. But I think the more important aspect of that is the opportunities it has created for graduates of our university.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for President Engstrom? President Cruzado?
Sure. Good morning. I don't think that there will be that much variation in what I have to report on the MSU side. So in order to add something new, I would like to do two things. I would like always to use this opportunity to talk about the history of land-grant universities, and then I would like to offer an opportunity to our Vice President for Research, Renee Rejo-Pera, to provide us some direct access to what is it that we do in terms of tech transfer at Montana State, because she has paid a lot of attention to that area. But first, I know that we understand how important this is in the life of modern universities. Just think about it. When universities first started, right, back in the 12th century, it was all about three areas. It was about theology, about law, and about medicine. And it's not until the 19th century, with the creation of land-grant universities, that we start thinking about new disciplines, particularly more applied disciplines. Not only we recognize the importance of basic science, but we also start talking about the importance of applied science, mainly engineering, right, or applications to the scientific discoveries that were being made in the labs and in the field. So in the 20th century, then we started venturing into tech transfer. Now let's take it to the next level. Let's see universities as partners in the economic engine of a city, of a region, of a state, of the nation. And that's why it's so important for us to provide these outlets of opportunities. As President Engstrom have said, this is a great incentive for our faculty members. When you talk about having vibrant faculty members who are engaged, one of the ways to do that is by providing opportunities for research. And the next level is for them to see how far their research can go in transforming the lives of people around them, right? It's not for the money that we do these things. Yes, there are universities, that University of Florida became very well known because of Gatorade, right? Something that started in the research, an incredible application, and now everybody knows about Gatorade, even if they don't know about University of Florida. We all aspire to have one of those cases, but quite honestly, that's not why we do what we do on a daily basis, right? We are not for-profit operations. We do it for the sake of knowledge, for the advancement of science, for the improvement of lives, and that's what's so important. Before I call Renee, I think that you have heard me brag numerous times about just one example in Bozeman, which is how our faculty in photonics and optics have helped contribute more than 33 spin-off companies in Bozeman alone. Because of that, the city of Bozeman has more optics industries than any other city, at least on a per capita basis. So that confluence, that combination of the power of intellectual power of faculty members, working with graduate students, working with undergraduate students, partnering with business leaders, create a sort of energy that's good for all of us. What we want to make sure is that all the controls, all the necessary controls are in place. And the president already identified some of them. I was thinking on my way here, some years ago, this Board of Regents actually directed both UM and MSU to create at least a 0.5 FTE dealing with research compliance as an additional measure to make sure that we have all our ducks in order. But in addition to that, we have specific committees composed of peers who are making sure that we are dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. We want to make sure that we not only are excited about the new frontiers of knowledge, but that we do it within ethical boundaries as well. And with that, Regent Johnstone, I would like to ask permission to call Dr. Renee Rego-Pera to the podium.
Please.
Sure. Renee?
Madam Chair and Regents, it really is a pleasure to be here to talk a little bit about our research enterprise. As you know, the Montana University System Research Enterprise actually exceeds $200 or $225 million that is brought into the state to address problems that are directly applicable to the people across the state of Montana. So as the president alluded to, we have research in energy, in optics, agriculture, health, both physical health and mental health, and engineering applications like the optics industry are one of our biggest sources of spin-off companies in the Bozeman area. So when I joined Montana State University, I came here from Stanford University, and we had a long history of dealing with the problems at Stanford, and I noticed that we had a long history of dealing with conflicts of interest at Montana State University. And the fact that you're dealing with conflicts of interest is actually a badge of honor. It means that you're doing a lot of work that's directly applicable to the people of the state of Montana. What we have done is we have hired a full-time compliance officer who deals with conflicts of interest and reports to my office. We meet quarterly. We've established a faculty committee to look at conflicts of interest, and we take it very seriously. I'd like to just give one case that will illustrate to you that the seriousness of this issue. We have a professor, David Dickensheets, who was awarded a National Science Foundation grant to establish a nanotechnology center. He beat out all of the competition, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, these great places. And he also was awarded a project in the Montana Research and Economic Development Initiative. When it came time to look at his conflict of interest, he wanted to be involved in a company called that dealt with microcavities, and I think it's called RevBio. And what he had to do was he had to step away from being involved in the company in order to bring the money into the university. And that's one of those cases that it was really important that the appearance of conflict of interest, since he was also overseeing students involved in the project, that the appearance of conflict of interest was really minimized. It would have been a direct conflict of interest for him to have received money at the university, money at the company, and to have overseen students involved with both entities. And I know that those types of decisions are painful for the faculty when they can't be involved in all aspects, but it also opens up opportunities for graduates from his program to actually be the leaders at the company. And so if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer questions. We feel that our system is really working well for the people of Montana. It's bringing in money. We're monitoring the conflicts of interest. Sometimes they come with a bit of pain in what we can do, but it's in order.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or further comments from the region? The point, at least my point in having this conversation was not because I thought there were issues, but because I think it's part of our oversight responsibility and it's educational, and we very much appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Unless any region has any questions or comments, I think that concludes the staff and comp meeting, once again ahead of schedule.
Thank you, Regent Johnstone. I would like to now move on to the Academic Research and Student Affairs Committee, chaired by Regent Sheehy.
Thank you, Regent Albrecht. Be joined by Deputy Commissioner Seck. We have several things happening on this committee, many of them involving academic approval process. The Regents will recall that we have adopted a new process for reviewing academic programs. And on this agenda of the committee, we have items that have proceeded through the old process and will be completed, and we have items that are here on the new process. I want to highlight that to my fellow regents, and I'd like Deputy Commissioner Seck to describe that briefly so that we can all recall what the change in this process.
Thank you, Chair Sheehy and members of the board. I'm very happy to do that. At this meeting, we will be phasing out the old academic approval process, which required new Program Center Institute proposals, among other Level 2 items, to appear before the board in final form 2 meetings in a row. Once as information and once as consent. For numerous reasons, as you will recall from previous discussions, this process was replaced with the new planning and approval process last spring. In March, you approved the new 3-step academic Program Center Institute planning and approval process designed to improve communication and collaboration between the other institutions of the MUS, our office, and the Board of Regents. This process begins with idea conception and academic program plans submitted by each institution and ends with a vote for approval of the full proposal by this board. At each stage in the process, academic program planning, intent to plan submission, and Level 2 submission, the proposals have undergone review by our office at OCHI, the system CAOs, and have been made public via the Academic Affairs website. The new process diverges from the old in 2 primary ways. First, a new step has been added requiring campuses to submit an intent to plan proposal signifying their desire to move forward with the development of Program Center Institute from the academic program planning list. This notification allows for early collaboration and discussion to occur among and between concerned parties, including the Board of Regents. As you will note, Information G on this agenda contains the intent to plans that have moved through the review process since the last Board of Regents meeting and are being shared with you for your questions and comments today. The second significant change is that because of the new intent to plan step, which serves as the first notification to the other MUS officers, OCHI, and the board, the full Level 2 proposal need appear before the board only once, at which time, if it is the desire of this board, will be taken up for a vote. On the agenda in front of you, you will see a Level 2 memorandum of consent agenda. This is the last memorandum under the old process. The items being voted on as a part of the consent memorandum appeared before this board in May as information. You will also see a Level 2 memorandum listed as action. This is the first memorandum for action by this board under the new process. Included with each item proposal in the memorandum is the intent to plan document, which appeared before the board previously as information.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. I wanted John to highlight this for a couple of reasons. Number one, remember that we see the intent to plan, but we see the actual proposal only once. So when we get to that action item, that's it. That's our only time to look at that in its final presentation. And I also wanted to tie this in with what we've been talking about for the last 2 days, which is defining mission and defining programs which fit those missions. That's what we're doing in this process. This is the step in our procedure where we get the opportunity to really look at what the universities are offering and what they want to offer and deciding the course of those universities. So this is a very important process. And the fact that it goes on over a number of meetings, sometimes I think we lose in the shuffle of that the importance of it. So having done the preliminary remarks, consent agenda. Does any regent wish to take any of the items on the consent agenda off the consent agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to the action. Under the action items, we have the Level 2 memorandum. There are 4 items under that memorandum, I think. Having a slow upload here. Here we go. There we go. Deputy Commissioner Sack, would you like to introduce those?
Thank you, Chair Sheehy, members of the board. As I mentioned a moment ago, these items have gone through the intent to plan process and were sent to the system officers via an August 3rd memo from me. They were discussed on our August 31st Chief Academic Officer's call and were discussed at the ARSA committee call just this Monday on September 12th. So, Regent Sheehy, I will introduce the first one, which is from Montana State University Bozeman. It's a request for authorization to create the Montana Engineering Education Research Center. The mission of the Montana Engineering Education Research Center is to transform engineering education at MSU and become a national leader in engineering education research. This center will enable MSU faculty to tackle big research questions and challenges facing engineering today with an overarching vision of improving student access.
Are there any questions about this program?
Yeah.
Regent Johnstone?
Sure, Sheehy. I don't want to take a lot of time on this, but I renew my request for the committee to reconsider the material they present to us. It's not conducive to analysis. It's too voluminous. We are sitting as a Board of Regents. We're making policy decisions. In my opinion, at least, we're relying on the staff to do the detailed work with respect to whether we've complied with all of the rules, regulations, policies, and practices. And I would once again encourage us to think about, can we make this presentation to the board and to the public in a way that identifies the key issues and allows us to make decisions with respect to those. I don't think it requires this much paperwork to do that and for us to do our job.
I'm going to ask Deputy Commissioner Sack to talk about that, but one thing I want to point out is that because we sit as a committee, this is actually what the committee receives also. So I think that part of that is the committee system. We could be doing this work on the committee and bringing it to the board in a different fashion, but because we sit as a whole, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. But go ahead, Deputy.
Chair Sheehy, Regent Johnstone, members of the board, you raise a very good point, and it's something that the chief academic officers and I are working on. We met in our office at OCHI in August for a day-long retreat. We focused on this particular topic, and we met in McMullen Hall on Tuesday afternoon for 2 hours, again focused on this effort. We agreed on a template for an executive summary, which we feel is going to go a long way, and we'll be presenting a draft of that to the commissioner for his consideration. And we're also spent some time discussing the program proposal template and how we could improve that. And I think there was I think there was agreement among the chief academic officers that this is worth the effort, and that we can create better structure with the template and develop guidelines that will help us and help the faculty develop proposals that are more concise. The full proposals are included on the board agenda because that is the historical linkage. So we have to do that, but I believe the executive summary is going to be a step in the right direction.
Thank you.
Hearing that concern, are there any other questions about this program? Okay. Move that forward then to the action items. John, the second item on our action agenda?
Regent Sheehy, Chair Sheehy, members of the board, the next two items are also from Montana State University Bozeman, and I would like to recommend we take those together because they are linked.
Terrific.
The Department of Health and Human Services at Montana State University proposes to develop two distinct options under the current early childhood education and child services major. The first, an option in child development. The second, early childhood education P3, leading to preschool to grade 3 teacher endorsement in the state of Montana. The child development option of the ECE and CS major will appeal to students with professional interests, including parent education, resource and referral advocacy, and child care administration, as well as teaching children birth through age 8 in non-public school settings.
Thank you. Any comments from the Regents regarding these two interlinked proposals? No? All right, anything from the campuses? Right, we'll move those to the action items. Next item.
Regent Sheehy, members of the board, the next item is from Montana State University Billings. It's a request for authorization to establish an RN to BSN degree completion program. And I would like to ask Dr. Diane Doohan, who is the Dean of the College of Allied Health Professions, to make a very short introduction of this program at the chair's request.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner, and members of the Board of Regents. I appreciate your willingness to listen to me for just a moment. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but Montana State University Billings is considering an RN to BSN degree completion program. You heard many comments yesterday from the healthcare providers in our area who are behind this, and for numerous reasons. They commented regarding staffing needs and future needs and those elements. But we had already begun discussions with those providers very early on about being able to fulfill this need and how we might do that when the Healthcare Montana grant was funded for the state. It was decided in the Healthcare Montana grant as part of the health pathways to include the RN to BSN degree completion portion. And I quickly jumped on board and joined the curriculum committee to be part of establishing the curriculum based on what I knew from our providers and their needs and what we needed in Montana. So our efforts culminate in this as part of what we did at MSU Billings and as the Healthcare Montana grant, and I thank everyone for those supports. The curriculum is a common curriculum through all of the RN to BSN degree completion programs for the state. We have utilized, in our particular case, the health administration model for course delivery. It will be totally online. There are 49 total credits. 16 of those are general education. The remaining are nursing credits. We will use an 8-week format for delivery. So we have discovered through the health administration model that works very well for online working individuals, which are the folks that we believe will be part of this program. So they won't take all of their courses in 8-week format because statistics is a little tough to do in 8 weeks. So we will have 16 weeks and 8 weeks. Based on the deliverables for the Healthcare Montana grant, we will do this in 3 semesters. Again, it's pretty fast-paced, but I've had a lot of opportunity recently to visit with nurses and ask them would they be willing to do this if they are ASNs, and they wholeheartedly. Some have family obligations that they, oh, I don't know. And so we do have a backup plan if somebody only wants to do this part-time. So we hope, we will want you to support this, approve it, and if you do, my work Monday morning is cut out as we anticipate our delivering our first class in the fall of 2017. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Yeah, I have a couple questions. First of all, being involved in this process, were you aware of the differences between the process that we used and the old process? Or, I mean, was that something that came to your attention? Did this seem fast to you? Did it occur quickly, or?
Well, we were in process on this, so that the old process. So, we didn't. I don't have a comment.
Don't have a comment on that. And the group that you've worked with, has it embodied the entire community? I mean, have you felt the support of the community for this program?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Initially, when we started and we asked what they wanted for curriculum, that was part of what my discussions were at MSU Billings campus. But then also the Healthcare Montana grant involved consumers and providers, so they were part of it as well. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any other regions have questions for the dean? Any regions have questions for the dean? Campuses? No. Governor's office or the Office of Commissioner, you might have comment? Yes, on this item?
You don't want him to give a speech right now?
No. No, okay. Any other comment regarding this from us? Okay. We have no further questions.
Thank you.
We'll move that forward then to action items. To Regent Johnstone's point, I'm having a hard time moving between these items because they're fairly large to load. Next, we have some information items. We're starting with the Student Affairs Update, Suicide Prevention, and Student Mental Health Task Force Report. I'd like to call on Ron Muffick. And Ron, if you would introduce your panelists.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. As you mentioned from the title of this report is on the activities of our Suicide Prevention and Student Mental Health Task Force, which we established at the request of the Commissioner and the Board of Regents in the spring of 2015. We have 4 panelists here today. Of course, there's only 3 of them up there right now. Betsy Asserson, she is the Interim Director of the Counseling and Psychological Services at MSU. Mike Frost is the Director of Counseling Services at the University of Montana. Brian Kasser is a licensed psychologist and the outreach coordinator and of psychological and counseling services at MSU. And Matt Kairos, who you've seen speak to this group before, Dean of Students at MSU, will join us shortly. So I'm just going to kind of set the stage for this report and then turn it over to, there's Matt. I'm going to set the stage for this report and turn it over to these experts. This report is a culmination of over a year's worth of work. We have a 15-page report that we attached as part of the agenda. We're going to go through a presentation that follows along with the executive summary, which is about 3 pages of that report. Within the report, there are 11 recommendations from the task force, which was developed from the 5 work groups that sat within the task force. The task force had 24 members, and of note, our work groups were even broader in scope as far as representation from throughout the university system and including numerous students. Of note, this is not an action item. We're looking for direction from the board for some next steps, some validation that we are on the right track, and hope to have ample time for questions. We'll go through the report, or actually not the report, we'll go through the recommendations. And we recognize that some of these recommendations may generate conversation, which is good. That's one of the things that we've discovered from going through this process is the amount of discussion on campus and the amount of engagement on campus has increased due to this task force and due to the work of these individuals that are here with me. So we do realize that some of these recommendations are things that we're not going to be able to implement immediately, but something that we think we can get to over time. And that we also see that there'll be a degree of variation at the campus level. But we believe we followed the charge that the group was assigned, and we stayed true to the integrity of the assignment and to our objectives. And so I'll go through if Amy or Katie, if you can get us started. As I said, I'm going to go quickly through the background. I've given the board the background at a number of meetings previously, and I want to allow time for our experts. So the charge of the group was to assess student mental health services and suicide prevention efforts throughout the Montana University system and develop best practices and make recommendations for improvement. As I mentioned, the task force, we had 24 members. If you go to the next slide, please. All MUS campuses were represented, as well as Flathead Valley Community College and Miles Community College. We had a really broad scope of participation with practitioners, faculty, staff, students, and administrators. We held monthly conference calls for the task force, and in addition to that, we had numerous calls from our work groups. The work groups were critical for us because we had such a large task force. We had 24 people, as I mentioned, and we early on decided, you know what, we got to bust this up. We got to figure out what are our objectives that we're trying to accomplish, and how do we get there. And so we came up with the work groups that would address the issues that we had determined were out there. We had an early intervention efforts, primary care screening and assessment tools work group, a common training, awareness, education, and collaboration work group, the suicide prevention planning, or summit planning, which the suicide prevention summit was a cornerstone of kind of giving us a baseline and a place, a jumping off point for the task force and to get the conversation started. Then we had a reduced access to lethal means work group and a data work group. These individuals here with me are the ones that headed these groups. I've told anybody that'll listen, if you could find a harder working, more dedicated group than these guys here in the university system, I would be surprised. I think we're very fortunate to have this level of professionalism and expertise at our campuses, and I think it's a good opportunity for the board to see what kind of professionals we have out there helping our students with their mental health concerns and obviously with the suicide prevention piece of that. So our task force, as I mentioned, number one was to develop and host a statewide summit on suicide prevention. Matt Kairos will talk a little bit about that. To conduct assessments of current practices, policies, and recommend changes and improvements, and to develop best practices and common training approaches that can be shared and followed by the campuses. And that's where our recommendations will align with these. We did a couple of surveys to the campuses. The first survey was to develop an inventory of the suicide prevention training programs that are provided to faculty, staff, and students. I provided this to the board previously. The second survey was a detailed mental health survey provided to campuses, and both of these gave us kind of basically a starting point. It gave us a baseline of what was being done throughout the system and where maybe there were some gaps. I want to make a point that campuses provide significant services to students. It's not like we're looking at something here and we're starting from ground zero. Our campuses do an outstanding job in addressing these issues. We've seen a significant increase, 16% over the last 5 years in utilization of mental health services. We met earlier this morning before we came up here, and Mike Frost mentioned that there's some recent data that has come out on the university system health insurance, the student health insurance plan, that shows the costs of student mental health have actually outpaced the cost of the physical mental health on the student health insurance. I think I got that about right, and Mike might touch on that a little bit more. So as part of our findings of our review, we did determine campuses are doing a lot, but we're lacking adequate staffing or resources to address these services, and that's based on some national benchmarks. Campuses are not meeting national standards for one counselor per 1,000 to 1,500 students, which is the recommendation. We're about 1 to 1,800. I think Mike's our expert on that. And the troubling part of that is when you look at Montana as having the highest suicide rate in the nation, and then couple that with the fact that we're 1 out of 1,800 instead of 1 out of 1,000 or 1 out of 1,500, that's not a good mix for us. So we want to take a look at that and address that as we move forward. So that's the background. The next slide has the panelists, which I've already introduced. And as I mentioned, not to put too much pressure on these guys and gal, but very impressive group. Really enjoyed working with them. I'm very indebted to the expertise that they provided, and never once have I had to kind of drag them along and get them to participate and to provide reports that we need or to provide information. They've been volunteering right from the beginning and getting us the information and really moving this along. And I'll be indebted. I'm indebted to them for being so dedicated. And I think it's indicative of how they approach their jobs with our students. They're very good people to work with. So with that, I think we'll move into the recommendations, and Betsy will take the first view, I believe, as the recommendations sort of follow the work groups. Each work group provided a number of recommendations, and that's in the 15-page report you have. We took those recommendations and formulated them into task force recommendations, and that's where we're at. We're looking, again, as I said, it's not an action item, obviously, because it's an informational item, but we are looking to the board to kind of give us direction from, okay, here's the recommendations, what are the next steps? We're looking at implementation and need some I guess, guidance on what your expectations are for us. So Betsy, go ahead.
Thank you. Chair Sheehy and members of the board, thank you for having us here today. It's very exciting to be able to talk to you all about the great work that this task force has done. I am Betsy Asserson. I'm the interim director at the Counseling Center at MSU Bozeman, and I've been there for 15 years. I'm also the chair of the Common Training, Awareness, Education, and Collaboration Work Group. And I do want to thank all the members of that work group as well. They did a lot of work and really contributed some thoughtful ideas to these recommendations. Our work group addressed just one component of a comprehensive suicide prevention plan. We incorporated the best practices identified by the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, as well as the JED Foundation and the campus program. Each of these programs, as well as the State of Montana 2017 Suicide Prevention Plan, recommend implementation of a gatekeeper training program. The CDC defines gatekeepers as a community member trained to identify signs of depression and other behaviors that put an individual at heightened risk for suicide. So this approach really empowers community members to identify students who might be at risk for suicide and assist them in getting to the appropriate care and treatment. It's important to note that it's not a form of counseling or meant to decrease suicidal thinking. It's meant to help people identify and refer those people who might be at risk. 90% of the MSU campuses do engage in at least one form of gatekeeper training, which I think speaks to what Ron was mentioning about the great work that's already being done. This work group recommended that each campus should establish guidelines to ensure that the appropriate individuals and groups on those campuses receive evidence-based suicide prevention training. So targeted groups to include would be students, obviously, as well as faculty and staff, administrators, and then parents and families as well. The importance of having accessible mental health treatment in place when you're implementing gatekeeper training really can't be overstated. When you're training members of the campus communities to refer someone in distress, timely and effective treatment is really imperative. If we're noticing that someone's in distress, we have to have a place to send them to get treatment. So this work group recommended that each campus have a licensed clinician on staff with new funding provided for campuses that do not have one already in order to ensure accessibility for treatment. This recommendation was also independently put forth by another work group as well, so I think that speaks to just the importance that across the whole task force around treatment and having care available for students. And finally, our work group recommended that the university system should establish a formal process by which staff from across campuses can consult about programming, services, and best practices. The Suicide Prevention Summit, which Matt will talk about, was certainly a first step in this direction, but there was enthusiasm, I would say, from all of the campuses to collaborate and work together on this important issue so we can share best practices and meet the needs of our students across the system. So I'm going to pass this on to Mike.
Before you pass the mic, anybody have any questions for Betsy? Go ahead, Regent Johnston.
Thank you. Just one clarification. You say on staff, but when I read this, it says on staff or on contracted. So is it a smaller institution, for example, that might not be able to effectively have somebody on staff could contract for that service? Is that? Do I understand it correctly?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. This is kind of a combined recommendation from the two work groups. And I think that continues to be a point of discussion to really understand the importance of having accessibility. So if we're talking about the smaller campuses, if it's someone on contract, what do we do if they're not available on that day, and having systems in place and to make sure it's someone who really understands the culture of the institution, because so much of that relates to linking people up with other services on campus. So I think that continues to be a point of discussion, sort of how that might work best. Thank you.
Betsy, I have a question too. This gatekeeper system, putting that in place. We've also heard over the years about some things we do under Title IX for bystander training, and many of the campuses have adopted a bystander training system with respect to sexual harassment and sexual assault. Is that the same kind of, that also is not meant to, it's meant to be an alert system and a support system. It sounds similar to what you're talking about with the gatekeepers regarding suicide prevention. Is there any correlation there? Is there anything that can be done on the campuses that already have a bystander protocol?
Thank you for that question as well, Chair Sheehy. I think, yes, we could look at sort of ways that there might be overlap there. In a way, it's similar that we're training people to identify and be aware, notice what's going on, and then get people to effective treatment. So yes, there's some overlap in that. And there are different programs that are evidence-based that we're using across the campuses, some of which are in person, some of which are online. So different ways to implement that.
There may also be some correlation in delivery. I know that some of the bystander training is done through resident assistants, and each campus has its own way of delivering, but you might find some resources there for collaboration or a similar delivery system.
Yeah, thank you.
Regent Lozar.
Thank you, Chair Sheehy. In terms of your first recommendation here, are there currently campuses that have no coverage?
So when we did the inventory, that it appeared that 3 campuses do not have a licensed clinician on staff. And I guess an important point that I didn't say related to that is that these clinicians can wear multiple hats. So they can be involved not only in providing direct clinical services, but be involved in providing the gatekeeper training, in training residence hall staff, and training others on campus. And they can also serve on behavioral intervention teams and sort of be the go-to person in some of those situations. So they would potentially be doing more than just direct clinical services.
I think we can continue.
Thank you very much for, again, allowing us to come and present these recommendations to you. My name is Mike Frost, Director of the Counseling Service at the University of Montana in Missoula, and I'm chairing the Universal Screening Depression Work Group. I was quite excited and privileged to work with that group. 7 campuses were represented. There are over 15 members, physicians, mental health providers, administrators, faculty, and we had a couple of students as well. And the goodwill of that group is very much a part of the recommendations. You'll see that in just a moment. Another exciting part about working with it is that this is one of those pieces where it's like low-hanging fruit, if you will. Not all campuses have primary care or contract with primary care providers, but a good number do. And so we see a lot of students in those settings. We know that a good number of folks who are experiencing depression do not receive the help that they need. So when you do universal screening, you begin to just ask and find out, because people don't always put it out there. So it's a combination of you have access to people that are more likely going to be having suicidal thoughts, and you are combining physical health, where it's easier to get into, with mental health and behavioral health. So it's a collaborative process. So the recommendation is simply that, is that the U.S. Preventive Screening Task Force back in 2009 recommended that all primary care settings do universal screening for prevention. They reviewed the literature just this last year and again reaffirmed that recommendation here in January of 2016. So you'd think that that would be happening across, and it's happening more and more across the country. Not on all our campuses. There were 2 campuses when we started this that were doing that to some degree. It wasn't universal. By having this task force, one has begun to do it again, and one is now beginning to do it universally. You ask, well, why aren't they doing that? Well, there are several obstacles that systems encounter. And so that is a part of our recommendations, and that not only should they do that, But we'd like folks, the campuses, to complete a survey that one of our graduate students at the University of Montana, Ivy English, has created a survey. It's ready to go, IRB approved, as part of her research interests, to take a look at what are the obstacles that our state is encountering in our university system in implementing this. And then we also are recommending that we form a task force, or I guess a consortium, depression screening consortium, to help overcome those obstacles on our campuses. And that's part of that good nature. I mean, the folks on the committee or the task force really are interested in doing that and making sure this happens across all the places where we have primary care. In addition to that, we'd like to make sure that we have the support of the Board of Regents and the resources to continue to train all the physicians, mid-levels, and as our first recommendation was, the support, the mental health folks, the counselors, psychologists, that they all are able to have a system in place to identify and address and care for the folks when we find them. So thank you.
Thanks. Any questions for Mike? Continue.
Thank you, Chair Sheehy and members of the board. My name is Brian Castor. I'm a psychologist and outreach coordinator at Montana State Counseling and Psych Services. Proudly served there for 16 years. I had the privilege of chairing the means reduction work group, which also consisted of staff and students from Helena College, Western, MSU Bozeman, and also Carl Roston, the suicide prevention coordinator with the Montana Department of Health and Human Services. Means reduction involves removing or reducing access to potential means for suicide. It's one component of a comprehensive plan towards efforts to prevent suicide, and it's part of both the national and Montana strategies for suicide prevention. The Jed Foundation, Suicide Prevention Resource Center, and Harvard School of Public Health recommend that means reduction strategies be incorporated into suicide prevention efforts on college and university campuses in conjunction with other strategies. Research on those who have survived a suicide attempt shows that the time between decision and action was short. 71% made an attempt within an hour. 24% of those individuals attempted within 20 minutes, and a quarter within 5 minutes. Given the impulsive nature of many suicide attempts, means reduction is effective in preventing suicide because it reduces immediate access to lethal means during a time of crisis. Suicide data also shows that those attempting suicide are unlikely to switch to a different method if their original means are not available. Additionally, means reduction can delay the time between thought and action and increase the likelihood of intervention by others. If other means are chosen, they may be less lethal, resulting in fewer fatalities. According to the Harvard School of Public Health, the most common methods for suicide with college students include firearms, jumping from high places, overdosing, suffocation, drowning, and hanging. In exploring various practices for means reduction, our working group made the following recommendations for our campuses. Each campus can form a multidisciplinary work group to examine opportunities to reduce access to lethal means, such as limiting access to high places, controlling access to toxic substances found in laboratories, reviewing policies regarding firearms and firearm storage, limiting the quantity and dosage of medications with potential for harm or abuse, and publicizing take-back services for unused medications. Additionally, there are several practices that can also enhance student safety, such as widely publicizing crisis resources, utilizing a campus care or behavioral intervention team, providing crisis resource information near rooftop exits, and ensuring that counseling and health professionals receive free online training provided by the Suicide Prevention Resource Center on counseling patients on access to lethal means. The policies and practices for implementation may vary across campuses, depending on the needs, resources, culture, and environment of each campus community. Tracking suicide attempts and completions can also guide means reduction actions, as well as contribute to statewide efforts to better understand and prevent suicides in Montana. Although I presented some surprising statistics, it's important to remember that suicide is preventable, and once individuals get the treatment and support they need, they can often resolve a suicidal crisis. Thank you.
before you pass that mic all the way down to the corner there, I have a couple of questions. First of all, the impulsivity that you talked about, is that unique to the age group we typically serve?
The data I quoted was from a 2000, bear with me one moment, 2009 study, I believe, for those aged 13 to 34.
Okay. And with respect to limited means, what do we do about our off-campus students? Is that mostly through the counseling department that you're suggesting that they get counseling to limit their own means? How do we deal with the two different populations, our in-dorm residents and our off-campus students?
Thank you for that, Chair Sheehy. I think I think that really speaks to the need to further train both primary care providers as well as counselors in lethal access to lethal means counseling. So certainly those students who are living on campus, there's sort of a safety net for those students because they're part of that campus community. And for students that are off campus, I think that further speaks to the need for gatekeeper training to train parents and friends and roommates to recognize those signs and symptoms of suicide and refer, but also for those students who might be receiving counseling or care from a primary care provider, that they're also receiving that counseling around removing or restricting those the access to those means.
Other regents? Any questions for Brian? Regent Johnstone.
Yes, thank you, Chair Sheehy. Maybe you covered this and I missed it, and so I apologize. Are the statistics relative to suicide rate among this age group in Montana as high as they are with respect to the overall suicide rate in Montana? I mean, is it, so it's similar?
Do you want to?
Regent Johnstone, members of the board. One of the recommendations you'll see today talks about a way of tracking not only completed suicides, but actual suicide attempts. And so we have a better idea of data. What are actually the data, the numbers out there? We do know through our friends from Carl Roston and his department that we're basically about twice the norm in Montana, that the number of completed suicides for the data we do have is basically twice the normal national average.
Regardless of age group?
That is data I haven't seen. We basically have looked at college, non-college, but the traditional 18 to 25 is usually the cohort that's measured.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Regent Albrecht.
Thank you all for your incredible work. This is such important work, and I appreciate your diligence. Question, are you prepared to perhaps put together some sort of recommendation, given all of the best practices that you've looked at with regard to firearms on campus and the issue? Certainly, I think that it's likely we'll see this come up in the legislature, and with the knowledge that you have, it would be great to have some recommendation from your perspective so that everyone can be educated about the impacts.
Thank you. Sorry, Regent Albrecht. So I think more education is always better than none. So the more education we can have on this topic, I think is crucial. Our work group hesitated to make any blanket recommendations that are sort of statewide recommendations for every campus, just because every campus is so different in their culture in terms of some campuses have university police and security, and other campuses don't. Some campuses have firearm storage in residence halls, others don't. So I think the main recommendation, at least at this point, that we're emphasizing is just to simply form a committee on each campus to review these policies. So at this time, we don't have any specific blanket recommendations for the entire university system, but rather for each campus to start sort of locally and look at what their needs are.
As a follow-up, with the unfortunate suicides that have occurred across the campuses, what sort of assessment occurs as to how that occurred and what could have been done to, for the future to prevent that. Is there data that's kept on that to help support your work?
Regent Albrecht, our ends are very small. I mean, even though it is a problem, the ends are still relatively small. Regardless, every time there's a suicide, at least at MSU Bozeman, we take a look at what was the cause, what do we know, how much we knew about the background of the individual, and what can be done going forward. One of the things we have done through these recommendations, and really it's Dr. Kasser's group, we've taken a look at the idea of firearms storage and what can we do with the legal firearms we have on our campus and how we can and should be storing them. As a byproduct of that is when students have firearms, their access to firearms in cars. And one of the things we know we have students who suffer from anxiety and depression. We also know we have young people that suffer from broken hearts. And this happens a lot, where a student will have a broken heart. They'll be homesick, they'll be lonely. And one of the most important things we think we can do is limit the means to lethality. Rooftops, pills, and of course firearms. And so that's where we think we need to take a look individually on our campuses, on our firearms policies, and to see if we can make better recommendations, starting off with, before we talk about conceal and carry, what do we do with the current firearms that exist in our campuses? And how can we do a better job with restricting them, especially in those moments that you can't walk back from?
Matt, will you give us your part of the presentation, then I'll open it up for more questions. They seem to be headed in your direction right now.
You got it. Well, Regent Sheehy, members of the board, one of the neat things that I've been a part of in the last year, Ron Muffick approached me to serve as the chair of our Suicide Prevention Summit work group. And we had a really dedicated group of faculty, staff, and students all across MUS. I saw my good friend Darla walk in from MSU Billings, and Darla was instrumental in helping to plan our summit. When we started this work, we really didn't know where to go. We had no idea what this would be. We'd never done this before. And one of the things we tried to do is to say preventing suicide on any campus really takes a team. It takes a village. The idea that our counseling centers can do what they do, but we really need to get our faculty, our staff, and our students from all different walks on our college campuses involved with this effort. So we got to work. We started planning, and our goal initially was we would have 100 participants come together at some point in Bozeman for this event. We did tracks for administrators, for faculty, for clinicians, and for students. The idea, we wanted to do workshops specifically for those constituents so that they would come and learn more about this important topic. And one of the things we didn't expect was the interest and the attendance from individuals outside of MUS. We had a great summit. We had 320 participants. We exceeded our expectations. But what we didn't expect were the different agencies. Great support from the Office of Public Instruction. We had local counselors, regional counselors. We had 2 middle school teachers and 5 students from Browning come down to attend our summit. And what we learned from this is there's a dedication. We have great resources. The resources we have with our mental health practitioners are outstanding, and they work very hard to prevent suicide. What we also have is an ethic of care across our campuses, and that's where we need that village to come together to support our students. And it really, doing something at this magnitude, we had a great event. I think one of the things that's important to recognize, this wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't the support of the commissioner to pull this task force together. If the regents weren't asking good questions about this topic, it wouldn't have been possible financially, in particular, to make our summit a reality. So we want to thank you. We want to thank you for making this topic important, bringing this forward, putting this on the table, and furthering this conversation in MUS.
I know we have some other questions. I do want to acknowledge the contributions of our former regent, Major Robinson, who was instrumental in pushing this forward, and his personal interest in this was really something that we took very seriously. So, any other questions from regents? Regent Berkey.
Thank you, Regent Sheehy. I'd like to get a picture, perhaps, of, if it's available, of the attempted versus the completed suicide rates in Montana. Regarding that access to lethal means, I want to understand, are we in Montana seeing a higher rate of individuals attempting suicide compared to national averages versus completing suicide in national averages?
Thank you, Regent Berkey. One stat that jumps out at me is that this is from the Montana Department of Health and Human Services strategic plan, that I believe there are over 300,000 attempts in the state of Montana, and I don't have the national data to contrast that to, just sort of on the top of my head. But to reiterate what Matt was saying, the national average for suicide completions, the national average is 13 per 100,000 people, and Montana's is double that at just a little over 26 per 100,000 people per capita. So our rate, as Matt said, is about double the national average.
Any other questions or comments from the regents or the campuses regarding the presentation? Commissioner.
Madam Chair, I just would like to extend my thanks to Ron and to Matt and all of you on the panel, but beyond that, just everyone that has touched this effort. It really has been a monumental effort in a short amount of time, especially for us in higher ed. But it's just so incredibly important, and the work you're doing will help students, will help lives, will help families. We appreciate that. We take these recommendations openly, and I really now encourage them to go to the campuses and see what's right for those campuses, but how can we implement as many of these things as possible for us. I realize that it's a little bit of like ADA legislation of years gone by. I don't know if we can do it all on day one, but we absolutely need to be working toward doing it all by day something. And I don't know what that line is, but we need to move forward on implementing as many of these as we can, as quickly as we can. It's just incredibly important to the system. We talk a lot in the last few years about student safety, and this is just an area where we really, we can make some progress. And I'm hopeful that we will, and I appreciate everyone's efforts and all of you that have really worked to come up with these recommendations, but broader on this effort at large. So thank you.
Regent Lozar.
Thank you, Chair Sheehy. And yeah, I wanted to extend our gratitude for the task force for taking this really important issue on. I think it's important to all of our communities. It's important to the campus. I know this is a topic that's certainly elevated to our governor, our lieutenant governor, to our legislature. It's a conversation you hear about in the communities that I work in Indian country. It's something you talk about every single day. So I appreciate the fact that you're working on some of these items, and it's not surprising that you put together a summit and a lot of outside folks outside the campuses come, because it is a urgent matter in the state of Montana. And I think this is the beauty of a task force, is that you get the opportunity to see what's really working well. So it's not all about just adding more resources to the gaps that we have. So I'm really glad to see some of the things that you've discovered that we can continue to do. But there's certainly some gaps. And when I hear suicide, I hear urgency. And don't take this wrong, but when I hear developing a committee, I don't hear urgency. And so that's one of the things that I would really like the task force to do, and certainly, Commissioner Christian, that these are recommendations that we move as quickly on as possible. I mean, I was a bit blown away by some of the statistics, the fact that we don't have coverage on 3 of the campuses, and we've got 1,800 students per counselor. Those are some of the things that I feel like we can change relatively quickly, and relatively inexpensive, fairly cheap. And so I really look to you guys to put together a very detailed implementation timeline for OCHI and for the Board of Regents, so that we can see and track the work, the important work that you're doing. And also, it's not all about funding, and I'm sure that there's a number of different things that can be done right away that don't require funding. And I was wondering if that's a couple of the things that the task force had talked about, sort of that breakdown of what you need resources for and what you can jump on immediately.
Thank you, Regent Lazar, for that question. Some of the low-hanging fruit, I guess you're talking about, like in the area of universal screening, I mentioned that there were 2 campuses that had begun that, and I believe that now there are 3, and close to 2 of them having, and perhaps all 3 doing universal screening, not just for appointments, but for people who walk in. So that is one, and that group has interest in forming a way to identify the obstacles and overcome those. So I think that is certainly one that we can do. Another is really just taking a look at getting those folks on campus, especially the smaller campuses. That does require some shift in how we fund those positions. But I think it's very important that they have that. A lot of those are in the rural spots of our state, and access to resource is limited there anyway. But I think that would be one of the areas that we could come up with some recommendations as to how to do that, and talking with those administrators on those campuses, how to make that possible. You guys have ideas?
Regent Lozar. I'd say one of the things that was our challenge here was creating a roadmap. A roadmap, 11 different recommendations, and a roadmap for colleges that are very different. Every school in Montana, every school in the nation is evolving and hopefully becoming better with preventing suicide. There's no doubt in Montana, the resources and our ability to do trainings and to provide support for students in crisis, every school is different, which is why you see very broad recommendations. We hope from the goal from this session today is that every campus will really assign somebody to really be on point, to be thinking and worried about this. On our campus, we have a partnership to do that, but really our lead suicide prevention expert that works on this as a practitioner is Brian Kasser. Brian, though, has a team, and that team works every single day to make our campus safer. We hope today that we sent the message to every school and to the Regents that it is urgent, and the urgency has to trickle down to the campus, and the campus has to respond to this roadmap as they see fit, because the needs, the urgent needs on the individual campuses are just different. And so our charge, we hope we've brought you that roadmap. We hope that you take it seriously, and we'll work with the campuses to follow up on that roadmap.
Regent Lozar, the other thing I would add to that is one of our recommendations around how can we collaborate. Matt makes a good point about the resources we have at MSU, a team approach where, again, this is one piece of a comprehensive model. And so how do we provide collaboration and sharing resources for those places that maybe don't have a team in place with a specific expertise in college mental health? Because there are some unique things that go along with college mental health that might be different from the community perspective. And so really providing that support and collaboration for places that maybe don't have the same degree of resources, even guidance on who do you target, where do you focus your gatekeeper training efforts, and really focus that on the groups that might have the most impact.
Thank you.
I have a question that may involve Ron. Does the task force have anything that they think we need to do specifically? I've heard that we're sending a message today to each of the campuses, but frankly, not all the campus leaders are watching this. And so how do we really get that message out? Are you looking for an action item in the future, some policy directive, allocation of funds? Is there some future action that you are anticipating requesting of us?
Madam Chair, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And maybe it is $1 million. Actually, I feel that we've gotten what we need from the board today. The fact that you're as engaged as you are, and you recognize that the work that everyone's doing, that there's a lot of work being done, that there's still work that needs to be done, that there are some gaps. I couldn't be more happy with the way that things have flowed today. I think the next step, as I see it, is for me to kind of connect with our student affairs officers and the vice chancellors and vice presidents of student affairs, who these people ultimately report to, and engage them and make sure that there's the buy-in at the highest level at the campuses, at the campus executive level. But I think it's been loud and clear that the board takes this seriously and wants us to move forward. Maybe the commissioner has other thoughts as far as if we need some policies or a commissioner's directive or something like that, but I would defer to him on that.
Madam Chair, I think Ron's right. I think we've got the message that we need, and the work has been done. I meet next week with the presidents, and this is certainly on the agenda to talk about how we implement this plan, and ultimately how we pay for this plan is a significant part of that. But we'll have those conversations, and it's just one of those issues that's embraced by everyone. I think we'll make some real progress on this. If we feel like we're not making progress, especially in some of the areas where you all have raised concerns, we will elevate it to a priority level that's sufficient, whether that's a directive from me or ultimately a board action. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we need to cross that bridge, because I think we're making progress. And understand that my expectation isn't that this is a day one issue, but it is something that we need to move toward as quickly as we can. We can't plan the timing of these things, and so today's better than tomorrow, and I'm very aware of that, and as I think our campus leaders are, and we'll move as quickly as we can to see that we're implementing some changes.
Any other questions, or go ahead, Regent Kirby. Berkey, got your name.
Thank you, Regent Sheehy. It's been said, but I'm going to say it again, given the gravity of this issue. I attended the summit this spring in Bozeman, and the highest suicide rate in Montana, that's not a statistic we should be proud of. And certainly as a university system with an educational mission, we definitely have a responsibility to not allow these recommendations just to accrue dust on a shelf, but to see them implemented and put to action. And so I really do. I challenge our campuses to take these recommendations back. And I wouldn't say I agree with all of the recommendations, but we do need to see progress and see this move forward. And I just want to say how vital it is to have the student participation in those processes as we're taking them back to the campuses and implementing them in those campus cultures.
Thank you. President Cruzado.
Yes. First of all, I wanted to once again thank the good work of our team, and thank you, Ron, for putting together this wonderful task force. I also wanted to thank the board. It was 2 years ago in a September meeting when the board approved the Center for Mental Health on with an emphasis on suicidality. And the work that has happened in those 2 years has been incredible. It's about research, but it's also about how do we bring people together across campuses in the different Montana communities. It's such an important work. I also think that tying this conversation with the conversation yesterday about budgets, it's so important for the regions to realize when we just see the numbers, when we just talk about the different categories of instruction or research or public service, this is the type of situation which campus leaders confront every day. How do we allocate precious resources in order to meet the instructional needs, the educational needs, the research, but also student services that are absolutely essential? And of course, suicidality is not only about students, it's also about faculty, it's about staff. It touches many, many lives. My question is, along the lines of Regent Berkey, is how do we include other segments? The recommendations are very wonderful about specialized training. But sometimes, for example, faculty are the first ones who notice strange behaviors or, red flags. How do we include faculty in this conversation? How do we make them part of this? How do we train in those campuses that have residence life? How do we include RAs and even custodians who see the students, who notice changes in behavior so quickly? What else can we do with faculty and students and staff?
Thank you, President Cruzado. I think that's exactly right. It's that community holistic approach to that. And actually, 75% of students say they would go to a friend first. And really the importance of educating all of our students to be the eyes and ears. And part of that is also breaking down the stigma. And that's true for our faculty and staff as well. How do we make it okay to approach a student and say, hey, I noticed that you haven't made it to class. You seem more down. You seem less engaged. What's going on? And part of that is I think we have such a caring community on all of our campuses, and it is the skill piece. How do we train them and help them have the tools to feel empowered to have those conversations and then get them to where they need to be to get help? So I think that buy-in throughout all sectors of our community is hugely important, and something that I think the summit was a first step in that, and also including faculty in these conversations on campuses. The students absolutely have to be a part of those conversations. I'm always blown away with the ideas that students have. I think something is a really great idea, and it turns out absolutely not. The students have a much better way to approach that. So I think that's vital that we include all of those constituents in those conversations.
If I could just add to that, thank you, President Cruzado. I think Betsy's absolutely right that certainly the training piece is important, but we also need to change the conversation about mental health. I think certainly in Montana, but also nationwide. We really need to start recognizing mental health issues as very treatable medical issues versus something that's sort of different or shameful, that's in a different category than physical health issues. So I think absolutely the training and skills piece is important, but also starting to broaden the conversation. So we can empower faculty and staff to talk about student wellness in general. We did some work on our campus this past summer and fall where we encourage faculty to let their students know that there are resources for help on campus, to put in the web links to the counseling center, to our suicide prevention page, to the online training programs, to put those web links in their syllabus, to really start to have these conversations with students, because I think faculty and staff would play a huge role in setting that stage for sort of creating the culture of acceptance for these issues, but also the promotion of help seeking.
And we just haven't touched on also behavior intervention teams or student care teams. Most campuses now have that or have developed that now since the summit. And those are really crucial because the more that faculty and staff know about that, they have a place to go and have those conversations that it's not always the mental health professionals on campus. And that is, I think, really crucial. It's a part of the overall education and destigmatizing, getting students to services. And it's a big part about retention. Students need to feel well in order to concentrate on these pretty complex academic studies. So I think Ron's group has been helping to train and get more support out there for behavior intervention teams. And I think it's a nice movement here in this last year.
Any other questions or comments?
You know, I would, Madam Chair, if you would indulge me. Betsy mentioned the sharing of services, and President Cruzado mentioned the budget. And over the last few weeks, when we've had this shared services discussion at the Commissioner's office, I've been trying to figure out, and I think this the fact that we maybe are lacking some resources at some campuses, and some campuses are better at one aspect than another. I think this might fit within the shared services approach. So we're kind of looking at that moving forward as well, and I think that makes sense.
Thank you. I want to close this portion of our meeting by thanking every one of you for your work. I had the opportunity to drop a child at one of our universities recently, and there's a visual thing that happens when you drop your kid at one of our universities, and that is there are swarms of people carrying their burdens, literally carrying their burdens. And I think of you all doing this work. We need to continue to carry their burdens, invisible burdens, the boxes that come the first day. It's all on the spectrum of what happens at college, and your work is really about that. It's about being that community of the university that makes it a family. So your work has been very fast, very thorough, and we really, really appreciate it. Thank you. We'll move on to our next segment. We're going to have the American Indian and Minority Achievement Report. Deputy Commissioner McLean.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board, Commissioner, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, wonderful to see you. And to all of my friends here today, it's wonderful to join you. Thank you so very much, Chancellor Nook, for having us here. My name is Angela McLean, and I am the Director of American Indian and Minority Achievement and K-12 Partnerships for the Montana University System. And so I give that introduction for you, our new student regent. Thank you all so very much for this opportunity to serve in this capacity. Before I speak to the agenda that I brought, I would just like to address Regent John Stone's conversation and questions that he had around Montana statistics. And as we converse about this very important topic, it is so very important that we recognize that suicide is the leading cause of death among American Indians ages 15 to 24, not just in Montana, but across the country. So these statistics are so very important that we begin to take a look at them rather than as statistics, but as students and faces and folks who bring the box of burdens with them, Chair Sheehy, to our campuses. So I thank the group that came before me for the great work that they have done and will continue to do on behalf of all of our students. First off, each year the governor's office asks agencies across the state of Montana to submit a tribal relations report. And this year, Regents, I am proud to tell you that for the first time in the history of the state of Montana, we have collected those and posted them for you and for all of the world to see. And if you click on that link and take a look at the wonderful work that is being done on each of our campuses, I assure you, you will be remarkably proud of the significant partnerships that our campuses are engaging with all across the state of Montana. I'd like to thank Edwina Morrison from our office, who is nimble and quick in making sure that we get remarkable data up in real time for folks to enjoy and to appreciate all across the state and all across the country. And as you take a look at each of these tabs, you will see remarkable partnerships between our campuses and our tribal colleges across the state of Montana, between our campuses and Indian Health Service. For example, I would point to the InSpsych program at the University of Montana, partnerships with our tribal health departments, and that is happening in conjunction with Montana State University and the Center for American Indian and Rural Health Equity. Additionally, I would tell you our tribal education departments are partnering in unique and magnificent ways on behalf of our students who live in Indian country with our campuses. And so to all of the campuses across the Montana University system, including my alma mater, the University of Montana Western, thank you so very much for taking the time to not only complete these, but to continue to do the extraordinary work that you are doing so well. It is remarkably profound. And I can tell you without a doubt that it is transforming the way that we do business with our students in Indian country and with their families there. So thank you so very much. And I would encourage all of you to spend some time marveling in all of the excellence that is happening around these partnerships. The next item that I'd like to point to specifically is the American Indian Scholars Program. And I met with Florence Garcia yesterday, and I'd like to thank her from this campus for leading such a great group of scholars last year with our inaugural outset of that program. She really hit the ground running. She had focus groups. She had community leaders come to campus for tours, and she really helped that scholars program to manifest itself in a great, successful way here on campus. And to all of the scholar liaisons who came to our office in June, I want to thank you for the great work that you're doing on behalf of student success on each of our campuses. And for you as a board, I want you to know that that program is in year 2.0, and we have asked the campuses to submit their unique plans for how the Scholars Program will move forward on each of your respective campuses. With that, we ask for two things: that the scholars be integrated into orientations, and that the scholars be integrated into tours around bringing families to campuses. Outside of that, the campuses can decide best as to how each of those scholars programs will manifest themselves, and we believe that that will lend itself to outreach by design and ultimately get us to a place as a system where we are able to boost American Indian student retention rates. Additionally, before I move on, I'd like to speak to the AMA Council. Commissioner Christian, in all of his infinite wisdom, created this council just a couple of years ago, recognizing that we as a state needed to take very appropriate and remarkable steps to mitigate some of what our data was showing us in regards to our American Indian student achievement. And since that time, the AMA Council has met. We just had our most recent meeting in August. And some of the items that we are moving forward on include, first of all, a campus-wide orientation for faculty and staff, a conversation that we hope will happen by design rather than hit or miss, so that every one of our faculty and staff understands the importance of meeting our students where they're at when they come to our campuses. And at the end of the day, that each of our faculty and staff know by design about the unique cultural heritage of each of Montanans' Indian tribes. Moving forward, the AMA Council will also be considering how we can elevate the presidents of our American Indian Student Success Centers. We will be considering how we can work with the 7 tribal colleges around funding for students to take dual enrollment coursework. We'll be considering how we can support our American Indian student support staff and student advising, and how does the Montana University system work with our tribal college student transfers, and if there are opportunities to engage and support them better. And so we have a very full agenda, but we continue to roll up our sleeves as a council to move this agenda forward in very aggressive ways. So I want to thank each of the AMA Council members and each of the campus leaders for making sure that those AMA Council members have your support as we go forward. Then I will move on to the Educational Talent Search Grant. Board, I am very pleased to report to you that we re-secured our funding for another 5 years so that we can serve close to 1,300 students across the state of Montana. I'd also like you to know that in this grant application, our team received 106 out of 106 points. So I would like to applaud Jeannie Aribo and her team for the remarkable work on this grant application. Next, I'd like to just point to Gear Up and dual enrollment. I know that it is a priority for the Board of Regents, and we're excited to tell you that Gear Up in the schools that we serve has reached historical funding levels for those courses. And last year, 255 Gear Up students completed at least one dual enrollment course. Then before I close out, I would just like to ask each of our campuses, if they have not already signaled their participation, if they would do so for our college application week that is coming up October 31st through November 4th, in making sure that we get our students in the K-12 system signed up to go to the best university system that exists anywhere across the country. And then finally, I'd like to speak to the K-12 partnerships piece and the work that we were asked to do in May around educator recruitment and retention, which, as you heard in May, is at crisis mode. And Dr. Seck wasted no time in dispatching me to the Montana Council of Deans meeting this summer, and then having another conversation that will take place with a group that he has assembled, noted as the Montana Rural Educator Task Force, so that we can, at your direction, begin as a university system to take a short-term and a long-term approach to mitigating those numbers that are truly at crisis level for some of our schools all across the state of Montana. So we wasted no time in heeding your concerns. So with that, I would take any questions or comments from members of the board.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Regents? Regent Lozar.
Chair Sheehy, Angela, I think for the board, I wanted to underscore the importance of the tribal relations report, and that's the first time it's ever been done within the system. I think we've talked about for years how to move the needle with our Native students, particularly around the performance metrics of graduation rates, retention rates, completion rates, so on and so forth. And this may be the first time that we've actually looked from a system-wide perspective, all the activities that we're doing for Indian country with Indian country. And I think it's just like collecting any sort of data. It's going to be able to drive sort of what those next steps are for us to really address some missed opportunities with our Native American students. You know, sort of in the same vein as the conversation we had this morning around the program approval process and prioritization process, I think for the board and maybe for the commissioner, it might be a good thing to figure out how to take these reports that each of the campuses are doing and sort of distilling it down into an executive summary so we can kind of see the breadth, the depth, the diversity of work that we're doing in Indian country, so we can see those themes and sort of learn from what's working on certain campuses. So I wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank the campuses for taking the time to do this. It's kind of a convoluted template that everyone appears to have gone through. So thank you for taking the time. I think the one thing that the AMA Council has talked about, and don't want to go into too much detail here because we're running a little behind, but and we've talked about, you know, coming out of the suicide prevention conversation is climate, and I know that there was a climate survey that was done last year, I believe, and maybe presented to the Board of Regents that really underscored some alarming statistics or responses in the surveys from our American Indian students and their comfortability on campus and some of the things that they're dealing with. And I think maybe this might be a general theme coming from me as a regent, and that's urgency. I want us to work as quickly as possible. And I know that was a climate survey that was done last year, and I really think we need to move. And I appreciate the work that you're doing in terms of looking at the space and the campuses. It's pretty obvious reading the reports that campuses are looking at space for Native Americans much differently than they were in the past, and students are responding. And I think some of those strategies are very, very simple, very inexpensive, and they're going to help us to have that baseline for us to be able to increase. Ultimately, what matters most is getting our students, Indian and non, through our campuses, through our colleges with those degrees. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and I think it's just another, I guess, call to the Commissioner's office that we got to move as quickly as we can.
Regent Lozar, Madam Chair, members of the board, your comments are perfect in that regard. As we, as a council, heard the results from the climate surveys that were done at the University of Montana and Montana State University. One of the notions that emanated out of that was this conversation around making sure that all of our faculty and staff on all of our campuses have this understanding that our Constitution spells out around the unique cultural heritage of Montana's First People. And that's what I had a wonderful conversation yesterday with Reno Charette and Florence Garcia around, is how do we make sure that that conversation, that education happens by design. And it not only happens by design once, but we make sure that it becomes institutional practice so that it is ingrained in us as getting up and brushing our teeth.
Commissioner?
Madam Chair, Regent Lozar, completely agree, and we feel that same urgency. I just wanted to say a couple things about the report. One, thanks to all those that participated in making this available. It is a first time, and I think it's really incredible work. And I think it will guide us in the right direction. But I want to be crystal clear that it's the tool to do that. This is an inventory about what we're doing and what we're doing right. Director McLean and I talked about this. It's not an excuse to say, look at all the stuff we're doing, it's good enough. And I want to say that out loud because I think, frankly, we've done a little too much of that in the past. We've sort of said, hey, we're doing a lot. We're doing all we can do. And we know that's not the case because we haven't reached the targets that we're looking for. And so we will use this as a tool. I think it's a great suggestion. We boil this down in a summary and we start to look at what is best practice and how do we use this and then how can we implement it across the system. And so I appreciate your comments. I thank all that have been involved in this. I really do believe it's a major step in the right direction.
Deputy Commissioner Sack.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I just want to congratulate Angela for an amazing job. She's been with us now almost 9 months, and I believe she has moved the needle. And a lot of things are happening, not only in our office, but with the EMA Council and the 2 federal grants she mentioned, the Gear Up Grant and ETS grant. So Angela, thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Regent Albrecht.
Director Angela, it's great to see you. Thanks for all your work. And I know that when you were sitting on this side of the table and in a leadership role that, you also experienced the frustration of what more can we do here? And so it's so exciting to see you taking the lead and making some real efforts here. What I'd love to see as you move forward now that you have some of these tools is to actually show us some of those key retention efforts that are tactical in order to really move that needle. In the past, there was just, and again, to your point, it just gets so frustrating with how many committees, it's just constantly getting information together. We've got to execute on these things. And so I'm really excited that you're going to move forward with doing that. You have the assessment now. Move forward, and I know you're the right person to do it. So thanks for all your work, and congrats on that grant. I have specific knowledge of just the effort that it takes, so thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the PLA update. Let's see, Dr. Loudmill.
Madam Chair, if you would like, I can say a few words of introduction.
I would like that. Thank you.
As the members of the board may recall, it was this meeting last September in Butte when the board approved PLA policy and guidelines. And it's the first time that we've ever had that statewide in Montana. Following that meeting, the commissioner quickly approved and created a PLA council, and he appointed Dr. Stephen Loudmill from University of Montana to be the chair of the council. And I think that's really important because when we started having conversations about PLA across the system about 2 years ago, one of the things we heard from the faculty is that this is important work, but it needs to be faculty-led, and that the faculty need to be in charge. They need to be in control. And so moving through this process and under Susan Jones' leadership from our office, it has been a faculty-led process. And so, Stephen, thank you for your role as chair. And with us today, we also have Elizabeth Ingebretson, who has spoken to this board before, and she's a student representative. And that's the other piece that we thought was really important, is that student dimension on the council. So, Dr. Ludmell, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair Sheehy and members of the board. I am Stephen Lodmell. I'm a professor of biology and somehow also the chair of the PLA Council that was formed in the last year. So I just want to sort of let you know what we've done with this council. It's a brand new thing. And so we put together a little presentation, and I've got a real page turner of a document that you've had access to read about our progress over the years, over the past few months as well. So next slide. So university systems around the country have come to grips over the last couple of decades that not all the profile of the average student has changed, and that many students are coming to our universities and colleges with a variety of experiences and learning, some of which occurred in a classroom and some of that occurred outside of the classroom. And so while campuses have always been comfortable with acknowledging prior learning when it comes like a transfer credit from another academic institution, the types of learning that you might that you might gain in the military or by self-study or through business training, it's been a little bit more difficult to grapple with. So most kinds of prior learning assessment that we actually do these days are commonplace, and we're all comfortable with them. Advanced placement and international baccalaureate and CLEP exams and occasionally challenge exams. Some of the other types of PLA training are not so well known, and so the intention of the Board of Regents and the Commissioner was to put together prior learning assessment councils so that we can sort of standardize over the Montana University system how we deal with PLA and set a framework and establish some guidelines about how to go forward. So a year ago, as Deputy Commissioner Seck mentioned, the board approved policy 301.19, and the objective of that was to set forth the guidelines. And next slide, please. In the policy was called for the formation of the PLA Council. And so Commissioner Christian received nominations for members of this council. And the membership, we have faculty, we've got admissions officers people, we've got registrar people, we have financial aid people. And so the main purpose of the council is just to help to implement this policy. So next slide, please. Our first meeting after the council was put together was online in January of this year. And some of the membership of the council were part of the task force that helped to put together the policy, and some members were new, so we wanted to bring everyone up to speed on that. And then since we've had 4 face-to-face meetings, and the primary objectives of those meetings was to figure out what we don't know and what we do know, and to establish lines of communication with the campuses to get the best information. I teach in sort of the upper levels of biology curriculum, and PLA is not common to me. And I needed to, and other members of our council needed to talk to the stakeholders, the people on the ground that deal day to day with students that might come with PLA experience and figure out how we can use this most efficiently. So we helped to organize that each unit in our system had a PLA liaison, and each one of those liaisons called together meetings on campus with the stakeholders, admissions officers, people, registrars, registrar's office people, faculty, and we put together a survey and accumulated all of that information, and we put together some priorities. So next slide, please. The first thing that our campuses said that we need to do is to put out there some guidelines, get some rule books put together, and in the policy, the MUS, the policy, it says that each campus should have its own set of local policy documents, so we encouraged all the campuses to get those together and get them vetted. One of the more important things to me was to enable tracking of PLA students. That is, are we doing what we intend to do? Are students that come with PLA credits, are they doing as well in their programs of study as the students who get their classes from a more traditional mechanism? We also wanted to figure out how to uniformly transcript PLA credits and how to transfer them between units. Some of the fees are pretty standard for PLA assessment. We wanted to do some research and recommend some fee structures. And notably, I mean, people are not knocking down the doors waiting to enroll in a PLA program yet. We'll need to do some more outreach. We're going to need to let students know that PLA is available. We need to train people on campuses in the admissions office to be able to identify students who might have prior learning that would be applicable to PLA credits. And so we certainly need to enhance visibility and outreach. And we also wanted to explore partnerships with the Montana workforce in terms of apprenticeships and internships. One of the groups that we identified as being one that we could really work with a lot and help with a lot would be returning veterans and military personnel. So next slide, please. We are lucky enough to have on the PLA Council one of our best and brightest students. She's a cadet and also the ASUM Vice President, Elizabeth Ingebrigtsen. So she's going to talk a little bit about PLA as it relates to military personnel.
Thank you. Chair Sheehy, members of the board, first off, it's an honor to be here and speak in front of you again. It's exciting to think that this time last year I spoke to you in public comment in support of this, and now here we are so much further and closer to our goal. And it's exciting to be a part of that. And I would encourage us to consider, continuing this student seat on councils like this because it's been so valuable to me, and I think the council. So he was correct. We are not knocking down the doors for PLA yet. However, the word is out. It is being discussed and talked about, and there's quite a bit of excitement out there, I would say. Veterans are excited. PLA is not new by any means, and we've been doing some forms of it, but it's not as well developed as it should be in Montana, and that's one reason why we have this council and we're working on expanding that. So veterans are aware of the PLA that exists and are excited to take opportunities here. So one of the biggest things that we're going to see from my perspective and a lot of veterans' perspective is encouraging veterans to go back to school. That's one of the first steps. Now that we're offering PLA credits, it's creating an opportunity for veterans to take advantage of their ACE credits and their training and experience and get a head start. And having that head start, as little as it is or as great as it is, encourages people to take advantage of opportunity and start school. So that's one of the first steps that we're going to see. It also validates and accredits veterans. One of the hardest transition is from the military into the civilian world. And when you have that validation and accreditation that we understand the training and learning that they've had, and we recognize those courses and give them something useful like actual class credits, it validates that they have learned where they were and we want them in the higher education system. So it also mitigates the unintended consequences. One of the biggest things that is an issue for veterans is financial aid. So currently, well, until recent, it used to be that you would get general education credits for your ACE classes. So you would at times get 90 credits of general education, which did nothing for you except for prevent you from getting financial aid because you would reach a credit cap. So most veterans do not look into using their ACE credits or getting PLA at all for fear of the consequences that it has on financial aid. So by having PLA and having this opportunity where they can get class credits rather than just blanket general education credits, we are eliminating that risk and encouraging veterans to now begin to seek out PLA credits that they once couldn't. It also puts vets into challenging courses that meets their levels. Recognizing, accrediting, and validating their learning is one thing, but the worst thing that you can have in a higher education class is a bored student. They're not engaged, they're not learning, they're there and they feel as though they've wasted their time. And then you have a veteran dropping out of school because they already know this. It's old news. So if we can put them in challenging classes and get them closer to where they're going, especially in some of the technical skills where they have vast experience in some of the skills that they want that certificate, giving them that push, giving them the credit and getting them ahead puts them in a place where they do feel like, man, maybe this is worth my time. Maybe this degree or this certificate really is something that I should be pursuing, rather than assuming that what they've learned and what they've done was enough. So that's exciting. That's an exciting step to eliminate that first step. It also encourages and initiates that relationship between students, veterans, and faculty members. One of the best things, and I think probably the best thing I've ever done, is talk to my professors. And you, as a freshman or as a new student, you maybe don't do that immediately. It takes a while to learn to initiate those relationships. Veterans have different struggles, and they're much more immediate because they're normally non-traditional students. They don't have the same sort of interactions that traditional students might. So initiating that relationship between veterans and faculty members as soon as possible and creating that support system is crucial. So I know from my discussion with a lot of the veterans on campus, which there are many, many of at UM, that we are excited, and as soon as we can get some of the faculty training out and start implementing some of these processes, I really see PLA being a huge player and really an advantage point for veterans and non-traditional students across the Montana University system. So once again, I'm excited to be part of this, and thank you for your time.
Okay, next slide. So I've spelled out some of the measurable progress that we've made. I just would like to sort of sum it up by saying that we've got policy documents back from almost every unit. We have, thanks to Dina Wagner-Fossen and the members of Macro, we've got codes in place in Banner at all of the units right now that we were able to track students with PLA credit to make sure that they're doing as well and probably better. They tend to be a motivated group as control students that haven't had PLA. Transfer and transcription should be straightforward now. We've got a document out to all campuses right now proposing a fee structure and searching for comment. We've done some outreach activities. Great Falls College has done on a grant some of their own. We're investigating ways to outreach, make PLA more visible, and we're also working with internship and apprenticeship people to try to bolster that partnership better. Daryl Lee and Sean Grove and Elizabeth Engbertson have done a great job of reaching out to the military community, making sure that returning military personnel know about PLA opportunities. We're trying to iron out the wrinkles in getting ACE recommended credits transcripted in a usual way so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time a veteran student tries to do this. So that's what we're working on right now. So if you could go to the next slide. There's still, we do need to raise awareness inside and outside the community. we will have to provide training to the admissions office people and to faculty and to registrars people and to the Veterans Office. So this is going to require a sustained effort. It's not going to be a once and done type of thing. If this is something that the Montana University system is interested in, it's something that we're going to have to look forward to. We will have to invest some resources into making it more visible until it becomes more standard in the community and on our campuses. And frankly, faculty, the culture is coming. And I came to this fairly agnostically. That is, I didn't know much about PLA. If you look at the data, students who come into our system with PLA credits tend to be among our most motivated students. We know that intuitively for the AP type students, but other students that are coming with other types of PLA are good. We, as faculty, value the product that we deliver as something that's greater than the sum of its parts. And therefore, there's a little bit of natural resistance to outsourcing pieces of our curriculum. And so what we need to be able to prove to our faculty colleagues is that let's track these students, let's show that they're doing as well as we expect them to do and maybe better. But another one of the challenges is just to make sure that we've got faculty at all levels on board. So that'll be another part of the work that we're doing in the next year. So on the next slide, I've got the members, hardworking members of the council who've done a great job, especially Sue Jones has helped out enormously in all of this. She knows as much about PLA as anyone. And the spectrum of expertise we have on the council is great. I look forward to working with that group for the rest of this year at least. So with that, I would like to pass it over to Sue Jones, who's got an update on some USA funds projects.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Elizabeth. Great job. Yesterday, during the two-year committee presentation from Dr. Kirk Lacey, you heard about a number of grants that he mentioned that are being used to sustain various workforce and outreach activities. One that I've been working with since May of 2015 is the United Student Aid, or USA Funds grant. This is a philanthropic organization, not a federal organization. A lot of people get that misunderstood with USA. And the area that we proposed doing work in was entitled Expanding PLA Across Montana, with a particular focus on veterans. And kudos to Dr. O'Brien and Deputy Commissioner Seck. They were instrumental in helping get this grant up and going, and the support from the governor's office. The flyer I just handed around, the smaller of the two, we made 8,000 of these, and what we've done, we've pretty much ported bulk numbers to each and every campus in the system, because there was an express need to have general information about what is PLA, what can it do for you. This is something that can be given to students, faculty, or staff to give them some baseline knowledge about PLA and where to gain more information. So one of the areas of the focus of the grant was to expand communication and awareness of PLA opportunities. Also, Dr. Lodmill mentioned Darrell Lee from the University of Montana Veterans Office. We purchased a portion of his time to go around the state. He spent about 3 weeks going to each and every campus to speak to the various entities who work with veterans on those campuses and bring together the different units that work with veterans, whether it's the school certifying official or the advisor or the Veterans Outreach Coordinator. He brought those groups together to talk about what PLA can do for you and discuss the new policy. He also spent time off campus at those locations to talk to veterans service organizations. Most of them didn't know much about PLA, not because they hadn't looked at it, they just hadn't been made aware that it existed. We did a number of awareness communications in the campuses, and we put out some webinars and some workshops. We trained 75 Montana University System advisors on PLA, and 51 faculty from the Montana University System learned about faculty assessor training. As Steve says, we do need more of that. Some of the PLA options for veterans we're working on, as Steve mentioned, we're in conjunction with Dr. Lacey in looking at military training and occupations and what kind of military training do our Montana veterans come home with, and what kind of pathways to a degree could we look at that might serve that veteran well, and what are the typical programs that they pursue at this point in time. Can we build a pathway and make that more streamlined? We worked with Healthcare Montana, some webinars on understanding military learning. What does a joint services transcript look like, and how do you apply that to your counseling to a veteran, to your advising? We also looked at building crosswalks from military training to healthcare careers with the Healthcare Montana grant. And of course, this grant has also helped with supporting our PLA meetings. It's been really nice to be able to have some really dig down, get to work meetings where we could spend 4 to 5 hours of time in a day to really get things moving with the implementation of this policy. Another area of focus is meeting the needs of the adult learner. We had some financial literacy workshops. The Student Financial Services Office, under the leadership of Ron Muffig, 2 of his outreach coordinators traveled to campuses with the highest number of veterans in the state and did some financial literacy work. They set up financial aid appointments and one-on-one appointments with veterans and their spouses to talk about financial literacy. Very well received, and an expressed need for more of that. Thank you, Ron. We have a web platform pilot project, and Katie, if you could bring that up. We have a website that we've developed that's a pilot project with Miles Community College, Great Falls College, and Missoula College. It's called Montana Finish Faster, and it gives a student an opportunity to go online and explore PLA options, learn about the assessment process, and how they might benefit. If a student determines that they want to pursue a portfolio assessment, they can continue on in this website and petition to submit a portfolio. This, of course, would be after they've had a conversation online with the advisor about whether or not their learning might be college level, and kind of explore how that process works. If it's approved as a petition, then we have an opportunity for the advisor, the faculty, and the student to all work on this portfolio submission online, so the entire portfolio submission and review, uploading of artifacts and things to prove what they know, what the student knows can be done online and earned online. We're very excited to see how this works, and we're doing some Google Analytics right now. There's quite a bit of activity in Missoula, we hear, so I'll learn a little bit more about that as we go along. And finally, the last piece of our meeting the needs of the adult student, and including, of course, the veterans, is I sent you a copy of our symposium that we're doing called Reaching Out to the Adult Learner. It will be held on October 11th. It's a one-day symposium. It's being offered free of charge with the support of this grant, and even includes breakfast and lunch, so y'all come. Anyway, we will have 2 nationally known speakers. We'll have a panel of adult students to talk about what their needs are in higher education and some of their requests and what is working well. And in the afternoon, we'll have breakout sessions that will be presented by our own Montana University System faculty and staff to talk about some of the things they're doing that work well. And with that, I'll conclude and let the board ask questions of any of us. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. This is an informational item, and we're running a little bit behind, but if there are any questions, any regents have questions? Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question about how your work has intersected with troops to teachers.
We have met, I think, the gentleman from Bozeman, Lee Gaub, G-A-U-B, yeah. And he has attended some of the the workshops we held. We had one in Bozeman that he was very interested in, and he's trying to work, come up with a way that how we could do a pathway kind of project for this. I think once we get our infrastructure better established, we'll be able to have discussions on particular degree programs and how that could be streamlined with PLA, if it makes sense. So.
It does. We have talked at length in this meeting about the need for teachers, pre-K-12 in our state. And as a retired superintendent from a school district that had troops as teachers, we found them to be extraordinary contributors to an educational system. And anything that we can do to invite those folks into the teaching profession, I would really, really support.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, I'd like to thank all of you, and especially you, Elizabeth, for not only your presentation today, which was wonderful, but for your participation. It's really very, very helpful. Thank you, and we look forward to hearing more about this.
Thank you.
We have 4 very short items for information, which Deputy Commissioner Seck will take.
Chair Sheehy, members of the board, thank you. And I also just want to give an extra shout out to the governor's office for their work in helping to secure the USA Funds grant, which has funded this. So again, thank you, Siri and the governor. As we move forward on the agenda, you'll find the online learning report. This is a report that we bring to you every year to give you a snapshot of the online programs in the state. And I won't take any time with this, but I will give you just a bit of a preview that in November in Missoula, we will be bringing to you a bit broader discussion on this topic. The commissioner appointed a e-learning task force, which has been meeting since late last spring, and they will be coming forward with a report and some ideas at the November meeting. So Regent Sheehy, if you'd like, I can
you may
move
keep
to
going.
The accreditation report.
Yes.
The accreditation report. This is a very simple report, but it's a very good report. It gives you a one-page snapshot of where each of the Montana University System campuses are with respect to the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities regional accreditation, and where the campuses are with respect to year 1, year 3, and year 7. And I'm pleased to report that all campuses are accredited by NWCCU and have transitioned to the new 7-year accreditation cycle and revised standards.
Thank you. Let's draw the attention to the Level 1 memo.
Regent Sheehy, members of the board, contained within this Level 1 memorandum includes items which have been approved by the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education as per the newly revised approval standards. And the items were presented to the CAOs on July 5 and discussed on our July 19th CAO call, and there were no questions.
Thank you. And the last item.
Chair Sheehy, members of the board, this item contains the intent to plans submitted to our office for for June and July. And these items have been discussed by the chief academic officers, and they have also been discussed in the ARSA call. And again, this is a part of our new process. These are the intent to plans that the campuses are now wishing to begin the planning process.
Regent Johnstone.
Well, first of all, I was a critic of the old plot process. I like the new process. The form is understandable, so congratulations, well done. A couple of observations. One, it would be helpful, I think, in this process as early as possible to get some information in the intent to plan relative to staffing, revenue, costs. I mean, I'm not looking for a detailed spreadsheet, but just some indication of that would be helpful. And this is, I guess, maybe addressed to Chair Sheehy. There appears to me to be a proliferation of centers coming about. We're seeing a lot of centers, and may be a good idea, I don't know, but what's the criteria? What's the evaluation? Why are we seeing a lot of these centers? Don't need to answer it now, but I'm hoping that the committee will focus on that going forward. And then I had a question on one, just a particular question, the MBA, MPA program, which seems to me to make sense, but so we formerly had an MPA program at Montana State Bozeman, is that Montana State University of Bozeman, is that correct? And that was for one of the campuses, and that was, I'm sorry, go ahead, please. Just a little explanation on that.
Regent Johnstone, the MBA and the MPA both currently exist at UM as separate degrees.
Okay.
This proposal is to create a joint degree combining the two of those programs together, both at UM.
So you would not, in the future, be able to get a separate MPA? You would have to get both an MPA and an MPA, or you could?
Regent Johnstone, the individual degrees would still be available as well. So this would be just another option to get a combined degree, but students would still be able to get the MBA alone and the MPA alone as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
And then one last observation, I guess, in the business school, the Center for Executive Development and Training, the only perhaps cautionary note I would make based on some experiences, that's a pretty crowded field. There's a lot of people out there doing that. And you know, I think it will be important for that to be successful to have a pretty clear focus on some areas that can differentiate that program for a lot of others that I get letters, calls almost daily offering our firm opportunities to engage in those programs.
Regent Johnstone, advice well taken. Thank you.
Any other questions from the regents on these items? I believe that concludes our committee's business then. However, we have a representative from the governor's office here, Lieutenant Governor Cooney, who has some supplemental remarks to make from the governor's office.
Thank you very much, Chair Sheehy. First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It's been a few years since I've attended a Board of Regents meeting, so it's nice to be back. I also want to say that it is a great pleasure to have listened to the presentations that I had the ability to hear, because first of all, I had the pleasure of representing the governor at the Suicide Prevention Summit that the MUS put on down at Montana State. And it's great to hear the progress and the recommendations of the working group, and again, echo the need to move swiftly on that issue, and it was great to hear the comments of the members. I also, it's very nice to hear how the great progress that was reported by Director McLean, because I've been watching that very, very carefully as well. And the prior learning assessment, in my previous life at the Montana Department of Labor and Industry, was deeply involved in the PLA discussion. So kudos for moving forward as you are. So thank you so very much. And so I'm learning a lot while I've been here the short time this morning. But the reason I am here today is to convey the governor's support as well as my own for the Montana State University Billings Online Registered Nurse to Bachelor of Science in Nursing degree completion program. And I know that you heard a great comment about this yesterday as well, but I just wanted to make sure that I was able to come in and to express the governor's and my support as well. You know, Governor Bullock and I applaud the efforts of MSU Billings to provide Montana students and nurses with additional opportunities to advance their careers within the high demand and high paying field of nursing. The healthcare industry already employs more Montanans than any other industry in the state. And economists at the Montana Department of Labor and Industry anticipate the industry will add as many as 1,100 jobs each year through 2024. Nurses will be in particularly high demand, with over 800 openings per year projected for registered nurses, nursing assistant, licensed practical nurses, and licensed vocational nurses. I do not visit any healthcare facility that does not tell me they have an incredible need for these positions. Students in healthcare are more likely to stay in Montana than their peers, and they report the highest wages upon graduation. In Montana, the average annual salary for a registered nurse is over $61,000 per year. This is good news in Montana and good news for students, but only if our schools and healthcare providers continue to work together to make sure that we are providing adequate educational and training opportunities to fill the industry's current and future workforce needs. In May, Governor Bullock held a roundtable discussion in Billings with local healthcare industry and educational leaders to discuss healthcare workforce opportunities and challenges in the Billings area and throughout Montana. It was a great opportunity to highlight the efforts taking place in Billings to increase and improve the opportunities for students and workers to prepare for these high-demand, high-paying jobs. And statewide, there is unprecedented collaboration taking place between the Bullock administration, higher education, and private industry. Through Healthcare Montana, the Montana Department of Labor and Industry, the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education, and 15 colleges are working together to train, recruit, and retain healthcare professionals throughout the state. As part of that effort, nearly 100 nursing and allied health faculty from Montana's 2-year and 4-year colleges came together with Montana's healthcare industry employers to redesign Montana's nursing curriculum. The new curriculum will allow for seamless transitions for students to stack degrees as they progress through their careers, and will allow students to seek additional credentials while they continue to work. The online RN to BSN completion program proposed by MSU Billings is a critical component of this design, allowing nurses and nursing students to complete their BSN in just 3 semesters from their home, communities, and their facility and other facilities. The MSU Billings proposal recognizes that nurses in all corners of the state should have access to opportunities to advance their careers and to better serve their patients and local healthcare facilities. Our thanks to the College of Allied Health Professionals at MSU Billings and all of their partners for bringing this proposal. By quickly vetting and approving this program, the Montana Board of Regents will be helping to ensure that our students of today are prepared for our highest demand jobs in the future, and that we have the trained workforce we need to care for our friends, neighbors, parents, and grandparents, and me as we age. Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you so much for allowing me to join you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. We really appreciate your comments. That completes the ARSA agenda, and I turn it back over to Vice Chair Albrecht.
Thank you, Regent Sheehy. At this point, we will take a 15-minute break, and we will return to finish today's meeting agenda. Thank you. Please take your seats. I'm on a schedule.
Oh.
President Cruzado.
Yeah. Point of special privilege.
Yes.
Madam Chair. So yesterday, and I want to say Chancellor Nook and his staff have done a wonderful job and welcoming us and feeding us for 2 days. Great food. But I told them that I was a little bit dismayed because yesterday there was no chocolate, no M&Ms, all that fruit and healthy snacks were making me feel unwell. So I said to him, where's your grievance process? So I want for everybody to see that Chancellor Nook has corrected the error. And I'm a happy I'm a very happy person now. Thank you.
And now she will accept any photos from any major news outlet.
Exactly. Now look at the smile,
with a smile.
now. Exactly.
All righty. Now on to, a little bit more important things, but we are going to go ahead and move into our action items. We have the 2-year and committee college committee, which just has information items. So we will move past that and into our administrative budget and audit oversight committee. The consent agenda, items A through D. I will entertain a motion for the consent agenda. Moved by Regent Johnstone. Any discussion? Any public comment? With no public comment, I will call for a vote. All in favor of approving consent item agendas A through D? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Okay. Moving on to the action item. Action item A, fiscal year 2017 operating budgets. I will entertain a motion.
I move approval.
Motion to approve by Regent Johnstone. Any discussion? Any public comment? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Item B, authorization to design a new academic building addition to the Phyllis J. Washington Education Center. I will entertain a motion to approve. Move to approve by Regent Sheehy. Any discussion? Any public comment? Public comment. I'll call for a vote. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Item C, authorization to move metal building to Montana Tech and construct an underground mine education center. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Regent Johnstone, motion to approve. Any discussion? Any public comment? I'll call for a vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Item E, authorization to construct, maintain, repair, and replace new and existing parking, street, and access facilities at MSU Bozeman. Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Regent Sheehy approved. Any discussion? Any public comment? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Motion approved. Item F, authorization to construct a new dining hall at MSU Bozeman. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion to approve by Regent Johnstone. Any discussion? Any public comment? Anyone need a break? Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Item G, authorization to program and design the Romney Hall renovation at MSU Bozeman. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Regent Berkey, motion to approve. Any discussion? Any public comment? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. Signify by saying aye. Vote.
Aye.
Aye.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain. Motion passes. Need some more coffee. Okay. Item G, authorization to proceed with an authorization to proceed with an energy performance contract for the replacement of the Strand Union Building chiller system at MSU Bozeman. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Approval by Regent Johnstone. Any discussion? Any public comment? Seeing none, I'll call for approval. Vote to. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Abstain? Motion passes. And that concludes the Administrative Budget and Audit Oversight Committee. We'll now move to the Staff and Compensation Committee. This item is all consent agenda. I will entertain a motion to approve the staff items A through I.
So moved.
Motion to approve by Regent Johnstone. Any discussion? Any public comment? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Emeriti faculty, items A through L. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Regent Sheehy, motion to approve. Any discussion? If I may, I would just like to note that we quickly go through this point, but I think when we look at our emeriti faculty, it's a point to thank those incredible faculty who have served us for many years, including one of my favorites, Dr. Larry Gainchetta, who's been a dear friend to me over many years and mentor. And I think there are many more that we recognize in this list who have made considerable contributions to our university system and our students and our communities. And so I'd just like to take that opportunity to note those folks who are on the list and to thank them for their incredible years of service. Any public comment? Seeing none, vote to approve. Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Thank you. And lastly, we have our Academic Research and Student Affairs Committee. We will begin with the consent agenda, items A and B. I will entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Sheehy. Any discussion? Any public comment? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. For the next action item, Level 2 memorandum, it has been requested by the committee that we go through each of the Level 2 items for approval individually. So I would like to begin with Montana State University Bozeman, request for authorization to create the Montana Engineering Education Research Center. I will entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Regent Johnstone approval. Motion to approve. Any discussion? Any public comment? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Request for authorization to offer early childhood education and child services, child development option at Montana State University Bozeman. I will entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Move made by Regent Johnstone. Any discussion? Any public comment? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Montana State University Bozeman request authorization to offer early childhood education and child services, P through 3, option preschool to grade 3. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Regent Johnstone, motion to approve. Any discussion? Any public comment? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. And lastly, Montana State University Billings request for authorization to establish an RN to BSN degree completion program. I will entertain a motion to approve.
I move for authorization to establish the program.
Motion by Regent Sheehy. Any discussion? Regent Berkey.
I just wanted to thank the public for voicing their comments. These past 2 days, it's shed a lot of light on the program, and we greatly appreciate it as Regent members.
Thank you. Regent Sheehy.
Ditto, and as a regent from Billings, I'd like to thank everyone who has brought this up to me and explained it to me and worked with us over the past year. I really do appreciate all the input from my colleagues.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Any public comment? Public comment? Seeing none? Oh, just, nope. Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Congratulations. Is that it? Okay. At this portion of the meeting, I would invite anyone who would like to come forward to offer public comment. Yeah. Please state your name. Welcome. And turn the.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner, Chairwoman, and the Commissioner Christian and the Regents. I appreciate you letting me do a follow-up statement. I'm Melanie Schwartz. I work for Big Sky Economic Development, and you enjoyed the presentation yesterday from Steve Arviskow from our organization as well. I just wanted to finish up your visit here in Billings by saying thank you from the business community for bringing the RN to BSN program to Billings. We watch every single day in our business community how important that will be to us and how that will really help with the pipeline of talent for our healthcare industry. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Hi, so my name is Ann Lynham, and I'm a sophomore at MSU Bozeman. I'm just here to voice my support in the renaming process in the Montana State University system. What really spiked my interest in this topic was last spring when Greg Giaforte made a recent donation to the computer science program on the stipulation that it be named after him. The buildings on campus and the people they're named after become a part of the culture within the campus. To name a school after Greg Giaforte would put his name in the mouth of all the students on campus and put his beliefs in front of everyone's mind. Giaforte's affiliations become the university's affiliations, and that goes the same as anyone who has a school or building named after them. I think now is the time and in the future to start a conversation about how naming buildings and schools on the Montana State University campuses affects the public's perceptions of its students and faculty. As a student at Montana State, I do not want the name to come with extra baggage of outspoken beliefs by our donors. By changing the renaming process, students like myself will have the opportunity to voice our concerns and remain impactful in our college community. So I really thank you for the time to let me come and speak about that.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Public comment? Seeing none, I would ask, do I have to ask? I am going to take full power of, before I do, I want to thank you, Chancellor Nook, for your gracious hosting of us in Billings and City College, MSU Billings. We really are excited about all of the efforts that are happening here in Billings. We look forward to continued conversations that will continue to help create what MSU Billings and our higher educational system can do to support this thriving economic community. We thank you for that. And we look forward to seeing you all in November at the University of Montana for our next Regents meeting. And with that, it's my pleasure to adjourn today's meeting. Thank you for coming and safe travels.
Nice.